Teslas are being torched across the country. Dealerships shot up and set on fire. Spray paint to vandalize and make a statement. People in Southern California are getting notes on their Teslas, calling them complicit Nazis for owning electric cars.
Imagine, factories on the Texas coast stand empty. Lights go out in New York homes in the middle of the workday. Gas in California has risen to a record $7.00 a gallon. And somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, a tanker carrying Canadian oil silently heads for Shanghai, bypassing Houston, as if the US no longer exists on the global energy map. This is not science fiction. These are the consequences of a deal that the White House preferred not to talk about until the very last moment.
I mean, the things that he's doing is not trying to make America better. He's ruining our infrastructure, every department in our government. He's ruining, and he's right now destroying our economy. He's taken away all of our allies. We're a pariah in the world.
April 2, 2025 was the point of no return. While Washington was discussing new sanctions and waging Twitter wars, Canada and China signed an agreement that turned the global energy order upside down in a single day. Just one contract and 3.9 million barrels of oil began flowing eastward every day, not to the US, as had been the case for the past half-century, but to Shanghai, Mumbai, and Tokyo. And that was just the beginning.
Well, this feels more like a Tesla-only story when you look at just this fall in EV sales for them, that they're suffering across Europe, down 45% in January. The wider EV market in Europe up 37%, so rivals are catching up and performing.
There was quiet laughter in the corridors of oil companies in Calgary. Canadian magnates, long considered submissive partners in Washington, were now confidently dictating terms. Chinese corporations are getting full rights to oil from the moment it is loaded. This means they can resell it to anyone they want, without American involvement, without American sanctions, without American control. The US is losing not only raw materials, but also the influence on which its entire foreign policy was built.
Running around on stage with a Tesla stock price, where the stock price had gone in half. And he was overjoyed. What an evil thing to do. What a creep, what a jerk. Like who derives joy?
But the real threat is not even that. When Canada began selling oil and gas for yuan and rupees, the dollar faltered. For the first time in decades, oil deals bypassed the US currency. This caused panic on the stock markets. Treasury bonds began to depreciate. Investors are moving their assets en masse into gold and francs. America is losing more than just oil. It is losing more than just oil. It is losing its status as a currency superpower. Meanwhile, the US is experiencing an energy shock. Hundreds of refineries designed for heavy Canadian oil are shutting down. Workers are receiving layoff notices. Cities that have lived off oil refining are plunging into economic silence. And while the White House talks about electric cars and milk quotas, people in Detroit are getting out their candles. And in offices in Beijing and Delhi, new contracts with Ottawa are being discussed.
371, most were saying 350 to 360. Now they're coming in at 336,068, production of 362,615. So for some point of reference here, you're going back to Q2, maybe Q1 of 2022 in terms of the last time that they had production this or deliveries this low for one quarter. So again, Tesla deliveries worse than expected at just over 336,000 deliveries in the first quarter. Guys, I'll send it back to you.
That's horrible. Can I just ask Phil, how about the Cybertruck? How's that doing? You got a little inventory there in the Cybertruck?
Do you still think that energy is just fuel for cars? Today, it is currency, a weapon, and control. And whoever controls supply controls the political map of the world. In this video, we'll tell you how a silent deal between Canada and China hit the heart of the American economy, why the energy crisis in the US is not an accident, but a consequence of arrogance, and how a country long considered a quiet neighbor suddenly took the lead in the global game. At first glance, it was just another statement amid the usual trade disputes. America introduced new tariffs, Canada responded in kind, but behind the dry headlines, there was something more. The beginning of a systemic breakdown of energy relations that had been forming for decades. This was no longer part of the usual game. This was something new. What happened on April 20, 2025 will be compared in the future to the oil crisis of 1973 and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Not in terms of the scale of destruction, but in terms of significance. The US officially lost its dominant role in the energy architecture of North America without even realizing how it happened.
That's from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. People just choosing with their wallets to not buy Teslas because of that Musk-Trump association. And actually here in London, an activist group called Everyone Hates Elon actually have been hacking bus stop signs with posters. I actually passed one yesterday. First, I wasn't quite sure what was happening, but it said the words 0 to 1939 in 3 seconds. Illusion here, 0 to 60 in like 3 seconds or something. But this poster was alluding to the start of World War II, and the image was of Musk giving that hand salute that we saw at Trump's inauguration that many have attacked as a Nazi gesture. Musk, though, has neither admitted or denied what he was doing. But we're seeing the knock-on effect of that anti-Musk anger across Europe and in terms of sales.
When Donald Trump announced from the podium that he was imposing a 10% tariff on Canadian oil, his voice sounded as confident as ever. He hoped that this would deal a blow to the economy of his northern neighbor, that it would spark panic in Ottawa, and that the Canadian government would return to its role as a submissive supplier. But something went wrong. 24 hours after that announcement, a meeting was held in a closed hotel in Calgary, attended by the heads of Canada's largest energy corporations, including Cenovus, Suncor, and the newly emerged leader, Dominion Resources North, which had just completed a merger with several American firms. It was there that a decision was made that would later be called an energy stab in the back of America. That evening, the green light was given to redirect all oil exports previously destined for the US to Asian ports. We are talking about 3.9 million barrels per day. And not just a redirection, but the signing of exclusive FOB, free on-board, contracts with a number of Asian countries, which legally excluded the US from these supplies. While the White House waited for Canada to back down, tankers flying the flags of China, India, and South Korea lined up in the port of Burnaby. These ships weren't just buying oil, they were taking away control. Each loaded tanker meant that America was losing not only fuel, but also leverage. In a matter of weeks, American refineries, especially in Texas and Louisiana, were in shock. Their production lines were designed for heavy Canadian oil. The alternative, light oil from the Permian Basin, was not suitable for the existing equipment, and modernization would have taken months and billions of dollars. The problem was exacerbated by labor shortages and a logistics crisis. Key pipelines that could have been used to transport oil from domestic fields were overloaded. This led to the shutdown of 14% of refining capacity in the southern United States by mid-April.
Outperforming as well in some cases, doing better than Tesla. And you just have to think, how much more is this a sustained issue for Tesla going forward, given the fact that you have Elon Musk, who's been very forthright in his opinions, particularly weighing in on politics, particularly in Europe. We've just had the European elections, which Musk has been very focused on. But across the piece, when you look at the performance for Tesla in Europe, it's not just in small countries. There are a lot of countries where Tesla has been performing badly, including in Germany, in the UK, where it has been lagging, and Spain as well.
In a parallel reality, on the other side of the continent, in the center of Calgary, on the 37th floor of the newly opened headquarters of China's Rangshan Prochemical, events of far greater significance were unfolding. It was this corporation, whose ties to the Chinese Communist Party have never been hidden, that was awarded an exclusive contract to manage the export of 40% of all oil shipments from the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Moreover, the contract included a special condition. the ability to change the port of destination en route based on market prices. This gave China the opportunity to sell part of the oil to India or even Europe, earning millions of dollars extra from each shipment. No American player had even theoretical access to these flows. A classified report by the Edison Group Energy Analysis Center, leaked to the press in May, shocked even skeptics. It claimed that the US had lost direct access to more than 70% of Canadian oil, which had previously been supplied at a fixed price with a discount of $15.00 per barrel. This meant not just an increase in refinery costs, but a complete loss of price control in the domestic market. The price of oil in Chicago jumped to $110.00, and the operating costs of US refiners rose by $1,500,000,000 a week. The stock market responded with a sharp drop in energy company shares, and panic meetings began behind the scenes at the Department of Energy. One unnamed advisor admitted to reporters in a private conversation, "We didn't just lose the market, we lost the architecture we had been building for 50 years.
Over the last couple of months. But the other thing that this could potentially be is an attempt at readjustment or correction by the Trump administration, in that one of Trump's closest kind of allies and supporters, and someone who's clearly very influential in the administration, is coming out to kind of push back against the recently implemented policies. So I'm thinking, or maybe hopeful is the right word, that this might be a signal that the administration is considering walking back some of those policies.
But all this was only the first wave of the shock. It was followed by a second wave, much more dangerous and silent. China did not just buy Canadian oil, it bought the right to dictate the rules of the game. Asian tankers calling at the port of Vancouver carried not only technical cargo but also reconnaissance equipment, providing China with constant monitoring of supplies. Moreover, a behind-the-scenes scheme was uncovered whereby part of the profits from oil refining in India went back to a joint investment fund registered in the Cayman Islands and controlled through front companies in Canada. This meant one thing: the new Calgary-Shanghai-Mumbai energy access was operating without US involvement and generating super profits for its participants.
Well, you will hear people over in Europe say the new Model Y, the Juniper, could be a difference maker, but that's been in that market now for more than a month. And you would think that you'd see a greater snapback if it's going to be a difference maker. Look, we could be wrong. It could be a difference maker once you get the sales for April, May, and June. But when you have a country like Norway, I think the sales were down something like 11% there. I mean, that's a very savvy EV consumer in Norway. And that's long been a strength for Tesla. Very small market, not huge volume, but I think almost all of the vehicles they sell there are electric. And they embraced Tesla long before others. And, you know, the reports there are not encouraging.
At the same time, the US was desperately trying to make up for the shortfall by buying oil from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. But these supplies were delayed, often due to political conditions and prices exceeding $125.00 per barrel. Even military refineries supplying the Navy and Air Force faced fuel shortages. For the first time in 20 years, US aircraft carriers began to receive limited refueling quotas. Tension grew in society. There were queues at gas stations. There were oil shortages in warehouses. There were disruptions in industry. It was more than a crisis. It was a loss of control. And it all started with one decision: to abandon the role of an equal partner in favor of the role of a dominant player. Canada no longer believed in the old agreements. And that is why it was the first to leave the game, not by slamming the door, but simply by changing the route of its tankers.
Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Kentucky bourbon. President Trump with the Irish Prime Minister visiting the White House today. The president suggesting his tariffs won't stop here, saying, of course, I'm going to respond. And tonight, right here, the new poll showing 56% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. The number's even worse now on the president's tariffs.
While Washington was discussing the consequences of energy pressure and hoping for a quick resolution, Ottawa was preparing something much more decisive. Against a backdrop of geopolitical tensions and tariff battles, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney held closed-door meetings at Lanark House, a historic residence previously used only for military cabinet meetings during international crises. It was there, behind guarded doors, that a plan was born that would later be called the New Canadian Doctrine. Its essence was simple: to rid Canada once and for all of its role as an energy appendage of the US and turn it into a full-fledged player in world politics. This required not only changing the market for oil, but also making a diplomatic gesture that would mark a point of no return.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them.
Canada also striking back with new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods, mostly steel and aluminum, but also computers and sporting goods.
When this became public knowledge, panic broke out in Washington. Congress convened an emergency meeting to discuss a plan for energy independence. However, it soon became clear that the U.S. infrastructure was not ready for a quick reorientation. The dilapidated power grid, problems with battery storage, and lack of investment in backup capacity exposed the scale of the vulnerability. An emergency proposal to build new power plants in Appalachia was met with protests from local residents and environmentalists.
We've accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations accomplished in 4 years or 8 years, and we are just getting started.
He praised all the domestic actions he has taken so far on immigration.
And I deployed the U.S. military and Border Patrol to repel the invasion of our country.
And spending cuts.
We are draining the swamp. It's very simple.
Meanwhile, energy flowed uninterrupted in the Chinese and Indian capitals. Moreover, China was not just buying oil, it had started paying for it in yuan. This was another challenge for the U.S. For the first time, oil from the new Trans Mountain Pipeline began trading on international exchanges in a non-based currency. In the first 3 weeks, almost 20% of new contracts were concluded in yuan or rupees, which caused a sharp reaction on the currency markets. The US dollar began to lose ground. The dollar index fell by 2.3%, and investors began to look for safe havens. Major Swiss banks noted a sharp increase in purchases of gold and francs. The vice president of Goldman Sachs admitted in a closed briefing, "We can no longer consider the dollar to be the only currency in the energy sector."
Worse than expected, 336 and 68 vehicles, 336,068 vehicles delivered in the first quarter for Tesla. For a point of reference, the street was expecting, the street account was expecting, based on analyst expectations.
These events undermined the foundation of US financial stability. After all, it was the petrodollar, a system in which oil and gas around the world were sold for dollars, that ensured demand for the US currency and allowed Washington to run up its budget deficit with impunity. Now, this order was falling apart at the seams, and it happened without a single shot being fired, quietly, methodically, to the sound of tankers leaving for Asia and the flickering of control panels in Chinese oil terminals. America was beginning to realize that this was no longer a temporary crisis. It was a turning point. It was the dawn of a new era.
Hey, Diane, this investigation really just beginning, and one of the key elements will, of course, be the surveillance video. And investigators potentially have a lot of it to work with as they try to figure out what caused this fire. We know that surveillance footage has been turned over, including video from each of the cars, which could prove vital to understanding what happened here, because each vehicle has its own camera system that works even when the car is off. And 16 cars burned in this fire. And right now, investigators don't know what caused it.
By the time oil from Canada finally stopped flowing to American refineries, the crisis had already spread beyond the energy sector. The first blows were felt in logistics, with gasoline prices at gas stations in California and New York skyrocketing. In large cities such as Los Angeles and Chicago, the price per gallon reached $6.75. People stood in line for 3 hours. Truck drivers canceled trips, and airports began canceling domestic flights due to a shortage of jet fuel. The American infrastructure, built on the idea of endless access to cheap energy, had failed. Social media turned into a field of outrage. Hashtags such as gas price doom, energy collapse, and where is our oil spread across platforms. Millions of Americans posted videos of fuel prices, photographed empty store shelves, and complained about how the rejection of Canadian oil was disrupting their daily lives. Ordinary people, from farmers in Iowa to Uber drivers in Seattle, began to understand that this was not a temporary fluctuation, it was a systemic failure. Amid growing panic, the White House tried to seize the agenda. President Trump, whose political capital depended on his image as a strong leader, focused on issues far removed from energy. Subsidies for electric vehicles, dairy processing, metal imports. His tweets, full of harsh words and accusations against Canada, while energy companies were asking for emergency help, the president's focus shifted to political infighting at home and attacking the media.
Tesla shares have slumped by more than 9% amid a fall in sales in Europe. The electric vehicle maker posted lower sales across 5 European countries, including France and the UK. Joining us now to discuss this is CBS News foreign correspondent Remy Inocencio. Remy, why do we believe these sales are dropping? What's driving that?
Sure. Well, Errol, basically what Elon Musk has been talking about over the past, say, few months, ever since Donald Trump's election back to the White House, that has been fueling this anger, this frustration, some even say disgust towards Musk, and they're taking it out on Tesla. Tesla now feeling the pain. But because of what's happening here in Europe, Tesla sales fell by nearly half across the continent just last month, 45%.
Against this backdrop, Canada continued to build its future. The world's first green hydrogen export terminal began operations in Vancouver. Routes were being laid in the Arctic for LNG deliveries to Europe via the Northern Sea route. And in Alberta's laboratories, engineers were testing smart grid systems designed for autonomous energy distribution between Asia and Canada, without US involvement. In November 2025, a new energy charter was signed in Paris between the EU and Canada. It included provisions on long-term supplies, sustainable tariffs, and protection against political risks. This charter essentially replaced US energy diplomacy, which had previously provided half of Europe's strategic supplies. Deprived of cheap Canadian oil, US refineries were forced to purchase more expensive and less suitable grades of oil from the Middle East and Latin America. This devastated the industry's economy. For the first time in 20 years, refining margins in the US fell below zero. According to consulting group Harper & Bloom, the average loss was $2.00 per barrel refined. More than 20 refineries across the country have cut back or shut down operations. America found itself in a trap. Having lost its main energy ally, it not only lost oil and gas, but also ceded its place in the diplomatic architecture of the world. And while Washington was looking for someone to blame, Canada was already looking confidently toward 2030, building an energy empire based not on power, but on calculation. For the first time in half a century, the question was not who controlled the oil, it was who was ready for a new world. The US, it seems, was not.